David Hall was supposed to be our follow-up witness, but I think he's tied up in commerce. But we'll go forward on this, and then we'll hear from Hans, and hopefully David will join us uh, after Hans. So Roxanne, welcome. I want you to know my late wife used to have your job, Sally Fox.
I'll say thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm Roxanne Vogt. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Businesses.
Oh, I'm sorry. She was just their lobbyist. She wasn't the executive director. Okay.
That's actually a correction to the agenda, just to note there.
Yeah, Jordan is the lobbyist.
Right.
Past tense, Jordan Giaconia was our public policy manager, and he recently accepted a great position for him. So we're currently looking for the position.
Ooh, okay.
And I'm filling in until we have someone in place.
Where has he gone off to?
He went to the Sierra Club, focused on divestment from fossil fuels.
Wow.
Businesses
Good.
specific.
Very interesting.
Locally or federally or
He
nationally?
formerly worked for the club, and so it's a remote position. So for the national org.
Wow,
Wow. Yeah.
that's great.
Still in Vermont, though. We have a Vermonter in their 30s and looking to start a family. So just the kind of demographic we want to entice and keep. So thrilled to have him.
Well, we're happy to have you here. I think you've probably picked up on what we've been talking about for sure. And we'd certainly welcome your perspective and what you see out there among socially responsible businesses.
Well, thank you, Chair Strachan. I appreciate your time and that of the committee this morning to speak. I don't want to rehash what's been said already, so I'll be pretty brief. Just a quick reminder about VBSR. So we are a nonprofit business association. We've been around for 30 years. We have 650 members across the state, all sectors, geographic regions. We are 14% of the workforce, and our members generate more than $4 billion annually. So those are just sense of scope for what VBSR represents. So I first want to just acknowledge the incredible work of this committee and others to support the business community over the past year. That's absolutely recognized and appreciated. I also want to acknowledge that the Senate Appropriations Committee has already approved the budget, and there's a set amount that's been set aside for the economic recovery grants, and also that the funds are not unlimited. So all fully acknowledged. And with the opportunity generously provided, I feel responsibility to share what our members are sharing with us about their own experiences and where the gaps still are. So as you know, we signed on to the letter that was detailed by Austin and others earlier in the call. So really, I'll just point out a few things. The main is that we have businesses that were immediately going into shutdown, either enforced or voluntarily, out of a need for precautions to protect the public safety. They were also looking out for their employees. So it was a people first situation that we were looking at here, not the bottom line. And as they did that, they also supported their communities, either by limiting capacity and ensuring that public health was a focus, or by looking into corporate philanthropy and supporting, sort of pivoting what they were doing. So the point is here, these folks really dug deep. They dug deep into what they could mean to their communities, what they could mean to their employees, and they dug into their own resources, as was shared earlier, retirement funds and so on, to be able to keep things going and provide jobs, goods, and services. When we look at the estimated unmet need as being somewhere around 500 million, and what we know is to come in the next year or so in terms of recovery, we have some grave concerns about 20 million being sufficient. So again, I want to acknowledge, I know that that amount has been set, but feel the responsibility to share the stories that we're hearing. And so I want to tell you just a little bit of about what we have been hearing. So one, businesses falling through the cracks. There are still folks who didn't qualify for previous programs, the PPP, the coronavirus relief funds. Again, it's been shared earlier. I think we're all very excited about the restaurant revitalization program. We're especially appreciative of the 21-day priority period that's set aside for socio and economically disadvantaged. And as I understand from Joan Goldstein, Commissioner Goldstein, BIPOC will be automatically included in the socio and economically disadvantaged category. So we greatly appreciate all of that. And we know, has been shared previously, that that amount of funding is set up through a first come, first serve scenario and competing with the rest of the nation. And that what we've seen with our smaller businesses is that these national competitions for funds are really difficult for them to navigate. And so I just want to share a little bit about those stories. So patterns in sector and type of business, folks who still have need: tourism, non-restaurant hospitality, events, small retail, and small scale service providers. So the goods, the services, the cultural and natural attractions that make Vermont a great place to work, to live, to visit, which we all know is so critical to economic development. Also patterns in size. So we've heard for businesses that are smaller and more informal in nature. So I'm thinking about service providers, micro businesses, solopreneurs, startups, that they're skeptical about grants. And there's a few key themes here. One is eligibility. Will I be eligible? And then mixed messages about that eligibility. Two, their ability to navigate the process. The availability of the funding. I think this narrative started with the PPP and unfortunately sort of ran rampant, but it's still rippling through the business community. So people not having a belief that they'll go through the effort and the funds will still be there by the time their application actually gets considered. And lastly, whether the juice will be so-called worth the squeeze. If they go through all of this effort, are they actually going to get something that justifies the time spent away from producing goods and services in the meantime? So I have just 3 stories to share with you. I'll say that from our vantage point, working with members over the past year, we had some consistent patterns that we saw, and yet we continued to be surprised by the level to which people needed support with navigation of the grant application process and outreach, including belief in what these grants hold up as a resource for them that is truly accessible and will help them. So one example is when we had this great opportunity for the restaurant community to take advantage of partnering with the community food hubs and become distributors of meals to those who are food insecure. I had folks texting me saying they needed a pep talk phone call to even talk to a possible partner who is a community food hub. So this just gives you a sense of, these are not folks who are used to applying for grants. This is just not what they do. So there's a sense of needing to believe in the process and then also navigate it, let alone their actual eligibility and ability to navigate it successfully. I also didn't quite understand the extent until I had my own husband who was applying for a forest economy stabilization grant. I think I probably spent 6 to 10 hours with him so he could accurately identify his NAICE code, which is the industry code. So he could format his income statement as was required, which took 3 iterations. And so I've got a firsthand view into what it takes for these folks who, again, are just not used to applying for grants to actually successfully navigate the process. And it's significant. So there's a few things here. Yes, it's the amount of funding, But it's also, as we discussed earlier, it's the outreach and the technical assistance that needs to be coupled with it. So I say the latter as we look forward, because we know that this isn't the end here, that as in order for these grant funds to be effective, we need to not only provide the funds, but be able to have the technical assistance and outreach that frankly is, I think, far greater in need than what we actually anticipated originally. So I'll leave my comments there. I'm so grateful for the Women and Minority Owned Business Program that we had in 2020. Also for the Partnership for Fairness and Diversity's BIPOC Business Survey that followed after that. And I do want to highlight one of the findings from that survey, that many of the businesses were led by folks who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, operate in the informal economy. I know Curtis Reed has spoken a lot about this, but it's worth pointing out that operating in the informal economy means you're probably not part of a chamber of commerce. You don't have access to any of the outreach or TA that was identified for those who do know about it. You may not even know it exists or be participating in that system. And so that's really important to point out. And then lastly, I just want to say how grateful we are for the increase in particular for the BIPOC Business Network and the retention of funding for the Better Places program. So thank you.
Great. Roxanne, may I just, Mr.
Yes.
Chair, may I just ask Roxanne a question about technical assistance? If you're hearing these stories, Roxanne, what, and you, these businesses are clearly engaged with you, or you wouldn't be hearing these stories. What are you guys doing about helping them apply? What, I mean, are you directing them to the, because we've provided a lot of technical assistance through the Vermont SBA and through our regional development corps, through our, through our chambers. There's been, so if they're coming to you and you know about them and they have these concerns, what are you doing to help on the technical assistance piece?
So certainly there's been an incredible, not only sense of coordination that I haven't seen previously between all the partners, so the SBA, the Small Business Development Center, the Center for Women in Enterprise, ACCD, Vermont Center for Emerging Technologies. Everyone has stepped up in these coordinating, collaborating ways I've certainly never seen. They've also, in some cases, added additional capacity, which has been great. So we've been directing people to all of those resources. I think one of the things that we've learned, and this is a little bit nuanced and a little bit challenging, so it's a long-term area to focus on, is that there's a cultural disconnect between what we, as those who operate within the system, see as a completely reasonable request for, let's say, an income statement, and how easy that should be in theory for someone to complete. And what for someone who's not used to that world at all is looking at in terms of a challenge that can feel actually insurmountable, and they just turn around and walk the other way. So I actually think what's needed here is partially a rethinking of how we think about businesses and looking at them sort of assimilating into our existing system, and instead making the system more accessible to them.
Right, right. Which is, I think, as you identified, an effort we're engaged in and invested in.
Yes.
Two questions, Roxanne. By the way, it's the first time I've met you, and I want to say how wonderful your testimony and clear it has been. So I appreciate that. You seem to focus a bunch of your testimony on small, struggling businesses. So I don't know whether Austin's letter, we received several letters, but I think his letter may have had the suggestion to raise the cap. And I'm wondering how your organization feels about raising the cap, given that it probably would adversely impact small businesses.
I do acknowledge that. And certainly I think this is one of the challenges that has been expressed, is the pot of money being set, the number of grants versus the size of grants and where to expand. I think wherever we have opportunities to provide flexibility, and I do support what's been voiced earlier with ACCD, being able to have some autonomy with the decisions that they make based upon the situation of each individual, to the extent that we can support ACCD with that autonomy, I think that that will help with the rub there that you've identified.
And I also want to know, I know I've expressed this a number of instances that I think the term unmet need, which you've referred to, is a misnomer in the sense of it just looks at receipts, a reduction in receipts. So for every dollar that somebody loses in revenue, that all automatically becomes a need, a dollar in need. And I think uh, you have to look at the overall, having been a small businessman myself, you have to look at, what is the expense side of the equation in terms of showing need as well. Have you heard from any of your members any discussion around that thought process or concept? Because it's kind of a little I'm not sure it's helpful for everybody to keep saying there's $500,000 in need out there, and then somewhat arbitrarily we land on $50 million or 20 million. Who made the decision that if there's that much need, why are we only putting 10% in? Or why don't we put 5% in or 6% in? It's so arbitrary in terms of what number you come up with. But it becomes even more arbitrary when the public thinks that businesses are suffering in terms of need for every lost dollar they had in revenue. So you look at and we'll hear from Hans, he's listening, if they were forced to shut down and they used to be operating, and I know you guys operate at small margins of 5% of your revenue, why, and that's the profit you make, why is 100% of your lost revenue now your need? So I don't want a long answer, but I'm just wondering if you've had any discussions with your socially responsible members of whether that's an accurate reflection of what need really is.
It's a great question. And I can't speak to the history or the origin of the figures that you've referenced, but I can say that, as we know, the distribution of economic impact for the pandemic has been unequal. So certain sectors have had incredible growth. Chroma Technologies, who Bellows Falls, they're working on some of the components that are related to testing for the virus. On the other hand, a 2x4 is now $10.
Tell me about it. I'm building a deck.
It's just crazy.
And if you wanted infrared thermometers at a certain time when you were looking to bring back your 400 employees, you certainly spent a premium on those, as was necessary. So not to mention labor, where you have a situation where someone now has to take into account, well, I actually have children who are school age, and if I'm to effectively be available for my job, there's a cost associated with that, which is different than it was pre-pandemic. So you have to be able to justify the cost for people actually being able to work who have school and less than 5-year-old children. So,
and that's given that maybe they have childcare even available, or which, because as we know, some major centers have closed.
Absolutely, there's several layers there. So the whole package, how we evaluate, what sort of a net profit is, has changed. And even to look 20 to 2019 or 2021 to 2020 is, like you said, there's several situations where it's not apples to apples. So it's complex, but certainly it's not just that how expenses went away once people closed down business.
No, I fully understand that. I just was trying to get at the issue of if a business closed down for a year and had $1 million in receipts in one year and zero in the next year, it almost sounds like they're saying, give me the $1 million, even though I have no longer have any expenses, where I would have wound up with, $50,000 in my pocket. I have so much need that you should give me $1 million. And I agree. Expenses have changed, and tax, whether it's tax loss or whatever, may not be the best measurement either. But for everybody to keep making it sound like there's that much need based just looking on the revenue side of the balance of the income statement, I think it's causes some confusion. Anyhow, thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. We're going to move on unless there are questions.
No, lovely to meet you.
This is yes, and this has been helpful.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, and we are going to come up with some language around this tomorrow, probably. Okay. Hans, welcome. Thanks for your patience. I'm glad the timing worked out. Very familiar with your establishment. I love it.
Yeah.
I know a lot of your partners. So welcome. I think you got a flavor of what we're talking about here. I guess I would start off with one question. You don't have to answer it initially, but I hope you'll get to it. In terms of the restaurant recovery program, how does that affect an organization like yours that has a restaurant and a bar and a hotel? So if you can touch upon that at some point, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Sorokin and other senators. Appreciate. I won't make it too long. I think there's been a lot of testimony given this morning. As you know, the Lodging Association and the Vermont Association of Wedding Professionals are aligned on this issue, and Talina has done a great job representing us. I think maybe a couple of points I want to address that I can maybe some answers to a few questions first. The restaurant recovery program requires for if it's an inn or a hotel that at a minimum 1/3 of your revenue is in the restaurant of the business, and from what we can see from our membership, at least over 100 hotels and inns, 70% of which are small properties, that there will be very few, if any, that will be eligible under the restaurant recovery program. Majority of the revenue is generated through room sales. I think of it this way: we're really in some way really in the real estate business, and we rent rooms out by the night. And what that does is it's indicative of what is unique to our industry, particularly in this pandemic, is that we're a very high fixed cost business, and that sort of leads a little bit into that unmet need discussion, Senator, that you mentioned. And yes, it's hard to see what the net impact is and compare that for every single business. But what we do know are top line numbers and where shortfalls were there. But I can tell you for a lot of these properties, and an example ours, where fixed costs consist of particularly finance costs, cost of finance, mortgages, property taxes, utilities, and insurance are four of the big ones. Pre-pandemic, those would run in the 20% range of your revenues. And as a result, during this pandemic, they ran between 40% and in some properties actually over 100% of whatever revenues they had left. So that gives an idea of the impact. And those fixed costs don't go away. We may have gotten some forbearance from some banks on some of the principal payments, but that doesn't make it go away. That's money you still owe. So property taxes have not been dropped. And I can give you an idea for a property like Hotel Vermont that's over $400,000 a year. I think the other point I wanted to bring up is the discussion around CAP. 70% of the Vermont Lodging Association membership are small inns, and that's representative in the state in general, that number of percentage of inns and B&Bs and hotels being in a small sector. But bigger properties also have bigger problems and bigger numbers. Our company owns and operates 3 hotels in the Burlington area. We are all locally owned. Some larger investors, but also a lot of smaller investors that, some rely on this for their retirement or for their income. So whether it's large or small, it's still a locally owned business that has impacted Vermonters to a great extent. If I look at those 3 properties alone, under the unmet needs formula, Senator, excuse me for using that term again, it's about a $16 million impact. The other part is that the continuing restrictions that have been put upon our industry, severe travel restrictions, we barely got the 14-day quarantine lifted. We all know about the closure last year when most properties were closed for 3 months, but those drastic drop in revenues compared to pre-pandemic has continued 40-50% range over the winter, in some cases 70%. And yes, there's a few properties that have done maybe okay because they were in a business where they offered more extended stay, where some people would relocate from out of state. But those are very, very few exceptions. So we continue to be affected by this, and we will continue to be affected. A lot of the group business has disappeared. Imagine a company or a wedding planning for this year and not knowing until a couple of weeks ago that their wedding might be able to be taking place or their business meeting could be held. Those pieces of business have fallen through. And I'll give you one specific example. There's the Vermont Captive Insurance Association, and about 1,200 captives, I think, in Vermont. Those businesses are required to have their annual meeting in Vermont. That affects a lot of hotels, including small inns. Don't underestimate it. There's a lot of small inns that house small meetings. This will be the second year in a row where that organization, where that requirement is waived, and those businesses will not have their annual meetings in Vermont. That's just one sector, just to give an indication. That all needs to be made up by individual leisure travel, as we call that. That's all of us going on vacation somewhere. And if you look at it industry wide, that component can be 20 to 25% of overall business. For some hotels, that's 50% of their business. That all needs to be replaced by small or individuals traveling. And that will take a while to come back. For instance, we're in talks with the same group I mentioned to you. They have their big annual meeting here that fills up all of the Burlington area for 4 days in August. We're talking with them now that hopefully in 2022 they'll meet in person. So that's the earliest shot you have at that meeting, and that's an example of many of those. That said, we are looking forward to recovery, but we're all kind of running on empty. Those PPP funds and grants that were issued previously, have been used up, and I think thank goodness the travel restrictions are getting less and less, and there is a pent-up demand as we think, but it's not just suddenly going to be back to normal. Same with the other interesting situation we're facing is on the employment side, which is not affecting this group, but it is a real issue. Whereas our industry laid off 70% of its workforce during the pandemic, we're now trying to hire back 20 or 30% of that to go back to maybe 60% or 70% of previous employment levels. There are 9,000 openings. We can't find people. They've either left the industry or are have other reasons why they will not come back. So we see that as a potential restriction and actually on our ability to get back to operating at full capacity, because if you have a restaurant or your hotel or you have rooms and you're trying to find housekeepers and you can't find them for all your rooms, and at some point you got to say, I can't sell my full inventory of rooms because I don't have people to clean them. And we're truly concerned about that is a factor that we do feel is going to impact us.
Can I ask you a question on
Yeah.
that at my peril? I really don't want to go off on a tangent here, but if you had a housekeeper that worked for you before and had a legitimate reason to go out of work, and you call them up and say your job is open again to come back, and they say to you, what, that they don't want to come back, or they're taking care of a child, or someone who refuses work, what
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is there is a rule in the law that if that person turns down your offer of reemployment, they could lose their benefits. Do you find that you don't tell them that, or they're not aware of that, or they're just taking the risk that, or they don't understand that? Because we're trying to get some education
Yeah.
out there for people who are no longer subject to the reason for leaving and are offered a job back, that they have to take that job back, otherwise they'll lose their unemployment. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, an issue this committee has dealt with a lot, but I
Right.
just want, you're on the front lines.
Yeah.
I want to understand this.
I would say from what we hear on the front lines is that the majority of this, that folks have found another job. They've left the industry and are working in another industry. There are some that are less motivated to come back to work because of benefits received currently. And then there are a few that are still in the situation, but that's changing quickly now with schools going back to full time, but still caring for some homeschooling
And I'm most interested in that middle group.
Yeah.
People you say who are making a preferential choice not to come back to work. We've been told over and over again by the Department of Labor, if they do that and the Department of Labor learns about that, they can lose their benefits entirely.
Correct.
So it's not a better situation for them, even if there are some of those people. And we have disagreements as to how many people are out there doing that. But to the extent I'm willing to admit there are some, I'm wondering why they're not aware of that law.
Well, it's it's interesting. You mentioned about bringing them back to work. We many of our members got to a point where instead of temporary layoffs, just permanently laid people off. So terminated their employment. So when you start to hire again, it's not like, hey, I'm calling you back to work from your temporary layoff. It's, do you want to apply for this job?
Well, no, that's not the way I understand the law to be.
Yeah.
You could lose your benefits if you turn down a suitable
Correct.
job.
That is correct, and that is, and I would think there is some of that.
Well, because one of the things we've heard is that, and I don't blame employers. They don't want to be the one to turn the person in, But then in the public policy debate, it comes back that these people are not wanting to work, and even though we have this tool to get them back to work, someone's not using it. Okay, enough said on that.
So I would say, as far as from our perspective, we most of everything has been said. If ACZD can have the flexibility to work with businesses to identify their needs, I think that's an important part. The fixed cost component, again, for particularly the lodging industry, is a big issue. That is because of the limited ability to operate over, through April that we know of. For now, we can see what the results are. those fixed cost components are relatively so high to what you earn that's really where the struggle is. And we see banks starting to change back to from affirmative payments to no, we're coming back to business and we're going to be in for the full amount of our loans again. And I think to include property tax as a fixed expense, and I think right now it's not considered in that fixed cost formula, but as a business it is. It's a cost you cannot change, whether you do $1 of revenue or $100 of revenue. That cost stays the same.
Are you still eligible to apply for additional PPP loans?
Not after this anymore, but I think many of our members have reached that capacity.
So you're saying that Hotel Vermont could still apply for additional?
No, I don't think we can apply for any more. Not our hotel. No.
Did you apply for the second tranche?
Yeah, we did, and I tell you, that's been a lifeline. That's been extremely important for us. And we haven't done the test yet of how much of that will be forgiven. There will be a component that will be turned into a loan. But from a cash flow perspective, those have been critical support mechanisms.
Right.
Yeah.
From where you sit, Hans, I mean, you're in a niche of a fairly high profile hotel. We've heard from a bunch of witnesses this morning that, relatively speaking, I think compared to the rest of the nation, Vermont has done pretty well in supporting businesses and getting, and I'm not saying we should take credit for it. Probably the governor putting out, markers out there has helped. But do you think Vermont has done?
Well, and Patrick Leahy with the small states grants, that's
right,
been
that's a huge thing.
That was the best.
Yeah, but do you think, from what you hear nationwide, that businesses in Vermont have gotten a good deal of help compared to other businesses?
Well, first of all, in our comparative market, say New England, we were the most restricted. And so our industry has been more, so you would expect we to get more help, but it's not enough. I know of, I don't know specifics, but I know Maine had a very supportive program. But Maine was also, in addition to that, Maine was not as restrictive in travel, in cross-state travel. And we appreciate that the governor has kept us safe. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, all these restrictions were for reasons, but it's I can't compare to outside of New England, but I know from within New England, it's hard to compare. It's not apples to apples, because we were shut down significantly more than, say, Maine or New Hampshire or Massachusetts, and so we've lost business to those states. I can tell you with 100% certainty that a lot of weddings this year have moved to New Hampshire or to Maine, right, because our travel restrictions lasted longer than our visitors were willing to wait, and they found other places where they could go. So I'd probably say I disagree that we have had the financial support that compared to other states, that's been better than other states.
Okay. Okay. Well,
may I just ask one more question, Hans? Just to go back to the chair's questions about the preferential people who are unemployed still.
Yeah.
Any of your staff in your 3 hotels take advantage of the upskilling credential programs and education that was offered for UI recipients, so that they upskilled themselves and came back to you at a higher level job? Did people use that to actually grow within the ladder of opportunity within your business?
Not specifically to that program, but we, as we're preparing for our season, we have been very fortunate to be able to promote some people from within, and particularly from our New American community. So I'm very excited about that. But those were not the result specifically of that. Another step that our company took is that we took our starting wage up to $15. So no one will earn, no job will pay less than $15, and there are frankly very few jobs actually that are at that level. Most are well beyond that.
That's great. And do you take advantage of the HB visa opportunities?
We don't, no, not yet. And it will be late for this year. But I can give you an example. We are operating our restaurant on limited capacity still, and we've sort of found a way to do that with the few people staff that we have. And we made a decision 2 days ago that while we had hoped to open our outdoor restaurant up, that we're going to delay that, and that we will do that in smaller steps because we're afraid we won't have the staff for it. And that's a real life situation. So
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great illustration.
Yeah.
Well, it's not great. I mean,
not so great, but
patient.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Any other questions for Hans? Thank you very much. Very informative. I can't tell you how impressed I've been with all the witnesses this morning in how articulate and clear they've been. It's been a good group of people. So thank you. We're going to sign
Thanks
off.
to the chair, and thank you, senators, for
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
you do not have an easy job. I appreciate your
Thank you for
all
saying
your
that.
work. Thanks.
We always
We
like to hear that. So it's 11:30. I would just like to, I guess at this point, I don't see David Hall with us. I would like to just go over a little bit reactions of what we heard this morning, both on the Northern Border regional thing while it's fresh in our mind, and any preliminary thoughts folks have had on recovery grants. We'll have Joan in tomorrow. We'll walk through. I assume all of you have seen the new guidelines. If not, we'll get them out to you on the Economic Recovery Bridge grants. That will be our starting point for any kind of legislation we pass around this additional monies. And it's totally within our right, if we wanted to do that, if we see a need to modify things that were in 315. I think you'll hear from Commissioner Goldstein that she'd like to keep the program guidelines for 315 very similar to what we do for these bridge grants now, with whatever additional money comes in, so she doesn't have to keep changing. They're so close in time. I'm not sure there's a need for change. So
Well, this need is slightly different, as we know. So it would be great to figure out how we can flexibly.
It is definitely different, but it's not in the sense, if you believe that there was extra money from the 10 million beyond people who had no grants in the past. Because and you look at the guidelines you put out, there's a whole bunch for that second priority group, and that's going to be the main priority group for this new money. So if we set the stage for that in 315, we might want to just continue going forward with it for this money. But I'll get that out to you again if you don't have it, and I appreciate you.
Is it the latest language posted on our website?
I don't know if it is. It's been released. Yesterday was the date they had to release it by, their guidelines. I think they did a
The
fairly
guidelines for H315, the GAP grants,
right.
and not the guidelines for obviously we're working on those, and also the capital regional investment language. He still hasn't landed fully on that, right?
Right, there is,
We have a draft, but not yet
with the
land.
draft. So that's where we're going to spend most of our day tomorrow on these two programs, because that's where most of the money. I see David Hall has joined us. David, welcome. We're going to adjourn very shortly. I know you've had a busy morning, but our goal for the tomorrow and possibly part of Friday, I don't know the time frame yet. I have to check with Senator Kitchell on this, is that, as you probably know, the appropriation bill has been voted out of committee, probably will be on the floor tomorrow and Friday. And there's very slim, thin guidance on all the economic recovery grant money. And she's either looking to us to come up with a floor amendment on that, or within 159 to flesh out the program guardrails on many of these sections in 159, plus the economic recovery grants, plus the capital, or it's being called the capital investment program, whatever. And I notice you have language in 159, at least on the Vermont Technical College section. It says it's the intent of the legislature to provide some sort of guidance for the money that's appropriated in the big bill. So I could see doing that on a lot of these sections, and somehow they'll come together in the end, because it's our feeling that we can't put out $90 million with one sentence guidance to the agency. So, for instance, on the capital grants. So that's what we're going to be working on. My guess is we'll probably go the latter route, where we'll amend 159 in a lot of places to put more meat on the bone. Maybe, and like, for instance, in Better Places, there probably be some changes in the language there, and we'll tie it into whatever the budget bill appropriates for that program within 159. That will give us more time. And Senator Kitchell has said, regardless of the direction of those two paths, basically the Commerce Committee and the Economic Development Committee will be negotiating out the details of these programs, as opposed to her and the House Appropriations Committee. So if that wasn't as clear as mud for you, you can ask me some questions. But that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow, and I hope you're available.
I will be available to you all morning as much as you need me. Tomorrow until 11:30, I have to go get a shot in the arm at 11:30, and then Friday morning I will be at your disposal.
That's perfect. Perfect. Any other questions from the committee? So my to-do list is to make sure you have the language on the capital and the guidelines on the recovery. And your to-do list is to read these things prior to tomorrow morning, so we could hit the ground running. I would like to ask if there's any feedback right now on what you heard this morning on either of the two issues. Not pressing you, but if there's some direction.
You mean from us?
Yes, from the committee, or other information you'd like to get. Okay.
I'm,
Senator
I think Keisha's got something.
well, I don't want to miss an opportunity to sort of reiterate a little bit what I think I heard. I mean, I guess I'm just sitting and I'm new, so I'm just processing out loud.
You can only use that excuse for so long.
We're getting to the end of that, given that you aren't really new.
Well, my first end of session as a senator, and trying to be respectful of how much is on the shoulders of chairs, and especially appropriations, in a year that none of us really have a handle on, the best path forward. But that all said, it does feel like and however this, goes forward in a negotiation around the budget, it does feel like this is the year to give more emergency relief, rather than sort of wait and see to January with some pretty specific parameters around it. But what I heard was sort of waiting to see how big the line gets, what the unmet need looks like, the compelling nature of the urgency of that need, and having in reserve some additional money that maybe, the Joint Fiscal Committee could make a decision in concert with you and other members of leadership to add more money to that, based on some sort of report
Well,
back from ACCD.
So what I didn't mention, I meant to mention to the witnesses was, their thought about, or my thought about giving ACCD some more flexibility to set the guidelines. The problem with that theory is the money may be all gone by the time they want to adjust it this summer. But if it's not all gone, they can make some adjustments on that. But the information that comes back could affect additional money in budget adjustment, for instance. It doesn't necessarily have to wait until July of next year. It could happen sooner. To be quite honest, I don't know that we're going to be able to. It may be a process between the chairs of appropriation of whether the House wants to put more money into economic recovery grants, but I think, the die was sort of cast by the Appropriations Committee telling us this is what you can spend at this point. And if we came back with recommendations for more, they would have just gone back to their number. So it's hard to balance. I appreciate what Senator Kitchell did in terms of allowing us to have input, but they have so many different things to balance in terms of dividing up that money. And obviously the governor's going to play a huge part in this too. He may feel that there's not enough spent not only in this area, but overall. But I think, if I have it right, I think the legislature is spending more ARPA money than he is in the first year.
We are,
So,
but we're also including things he hadn't included, like courts and workforce and
and
the state
pension,
colleges and pen, all of that is.
right.
So
So
I
it's got a ways to go, but yeah, I mean, I just don't. I do want to give. I personally would like to give ACCD some more flexibility if that's the only way to do it, but only after we see some results on this first amount of money.
Right. But I agree with Keisha. Generally, I think this is the year to front load it for businesses. We can absolutely, on certain infrastructure pieces, spend it for the 4 years we have. We have the luxury of being able to spend this money. But we discussed that in committee. I mean, with the amount that was left, it was definitely important to give it to businesses who need it now to survive. So I think as much as we're able to do that, I think that's important.
Yep. Okay, and on the, I guess certainly if this bill goes into next week, we can wait on the Northern Borders thing until we hear the result of that Friday meeting.
Right.
I think they may come together and be okay.
There are
with.
two other issues that I'd like to make sure we address, which is the brownfields language about getting rid of that cap of $200,000. That's important for our brownfields projects. And the other piece is the mixed income housing, which I think we want to
Right.
be able to, if we can. And I think Jen Holler's, I think people are open to that. So I think that that would be something that we could also have a conversation about for H159.
Well, on those two, should we not take care of those before the budget is voted on? Or
Yes, it would be great. I haven't heard back from Jane about it. I know that Jen is very open to the mixed housing piece. The language, it's just it's not a money issue with the brownfields, it's a language issue about, so I thought that is why we,
Let's take them one at a time. On the brownfield issue, is the language in the budget broad enough that we could take care of it in 159?
it's broad, I believe it's broad enough so that we could correct it in 159.
Okay. And on
If-
the house, same thing on the housing?
I haven't looked at the language on the housing. Maybe David, who wrote that language, could help edify us on that. But I believe it's just 91 million. I'd have to, I need David, but I understand it's 91 million all to affordable housing as opposed to the tranches that had been identified that I thought that the appropriations was considering, which was 20 million to mixed income, 5 million for VHIP. And I just don't know what, I just know that most of that got put into 91 million for affordable housing.
So the VHIP money was not
No, the
separated?
VHIP
either?
money, I believe, is there. David, what would you be kind enough to weigh in on that? I haven't,
I didn't work on any of that. I don't know what $91 million you're talking about.
Okay,
oh,
so
you didn't do the housing writing for the budget? I just assumed you did. Sorry.
It's a reasonable assumption, but
It is.
sometimes I get surprised by things too. Like, hey, review this language. Oh, they're spending $91 million on housing. Oh, surprise.
okay.
Yeah,
All right, so I think I said this yesterday, I didn't follow through on this. Let's get in touch with Jane and Stephanie Barrett. And if it's $91 million for affordable housing, I think Jane is expecting us to do precisely what you're concerned about. I don't know about the brownfield issue, whether what their expectation was, but it certainly sounds like they wouldn't have, they're mostly interested in the total amount of dollars and not getting into the weeds on how it's broken out. So I think we can take care of these, and let me write Jane and Stephanie Barrett and get the ball rolling on that, and we'll report back tomorrow how that goes. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. I guess we'll see everybody tomorrow. And we're on the floor at 1, correct?
correct.